Montana Territory, late September of 1884. The wind howled down off the Ozarka Range, cold enough to bite, and no one with sense wandered the Gallatin Valley after sundown unless they were running from something or riding straight into it. Edda Granger was doing both. Her boots hit the earth fast, dress hem soaked from the river, hands cut raw. She clutched 2 blankets to her chest, one wrapped around each of her children Grady, 6, and his sister Ginny, 4. Their small limbs clung to her like tree roots wrapped around stone. Behind them, smoke curled up from the ridge, and gunfire still echoed faint in the distance. Her late husband's deaths had finally drawn blood. She had not cried yet. Not when the man with the broken nose kicked in the door. Not when she'd hidden her children in the hayloft. Not even when the barn went up in flames and she'd run with both of them screaming. But now, the cold was inside her bones, and she had no horse, no food, and no one left, until a rider came over the rise. He was tall in the saddle, coat flapping behind him like a black flag, hat pulled low. The horse beneath him was a broad-chested dun, steady and fast. He saw her and pulled the reins, kicking up dust as he slid to a halt. Edda froze. Grady whimpered. The man dismounted in one motion and walked toward them with his hands open and slow. "Name's Zeke Farrow," he said, voice low and rough like the gravel underfoot. "You hurt." Edda tightened her grip on her children. "Do not come closer." "I will not," he said. "But the little ones are shaking, and there is a fire behind you." "I know." Zeke glanced back, then returned his gaze to her. His eyes were blue, a deep, storm dark blue and steady. "There is a cabin 2 miles north," he said. "Mine. You can walk it or I can ride slow and lead you. But you need shelter." "I do not want hope," she said harshly. "Do you understand? I do not want to believe in men like you anymore." He did not flinch, did not argue. He just looked at her, really looked, like he could see the whole map of her grief printed across her face. "Then let me hold it for both of us," Zeke said quietly. Her throat tightened. She did not trust him, not yet, but something in his voice cracked through her fear. When Grady leaned forward and whispered, "Mama, I am cold," she finally nodded. Zeke turned and mounted again. "Walk beside me. We will go slow." She followed, not because she believed in him, but because her children needed to survive the night. The trail twisted through pine and rock. The moon was barely rising when his cabin came into view, small but solid, with smoke curling from the chimney and a lantern flickering behind the windowpane. Inside, the warmth hit her like a wave. Zeke moved quick, laying quilts near the hearth, pulling down jars of beans and dried venison. She sat the children near the fire, rubbing their fingers until they stopped shaking. He handed her a tin cup of water. "There is stew warming. They can eat." Edda took it, silent. She watched him move, calm, careful, never once looking at her with pity, just quiet purpose. After the children ate and curled up by the fire, she stood up stiffly. "You do not want the truth, but I will give it to you," she said. "My husband owed men money. He died last winter, and they came today to collect what was not theirs. They burned our barn. They might come again." Zeke leaned against the wooden counter, arms crossed. "Then they will find nothing but smoke and my rifle." Edda blinked. "Why? You do not know me." "I know enough," he said. "You ran through cold river water with 2 children in your arms. You are stronger than most men I have met." She dropped her gaze, swallowing the knot in her throat. "I do not need saving." "I believe that," Zeke said. "But I have a warm roof and 2 hands. Let me help until you say stop." She gave him a long look, then nodded once. That night, she curled on a pallet beside her children, and for the first time in months, they slept through the dark. The next morning, Edda woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of wood being chopped outside. She stepped to the door and watched through the crack Zeke splitting logs, sleeves rolled up, steam rising from his breath. Grady peeked out beside her. "Is he a cowboy?" he whispered. "I think so," she whispered back. The days passed. She cooked. He hunted. He taught Grady how to whittle and Ginny how to feed the hens. He never asked questions she did not want to answer. Never once tried to touch her. But his presence filled the cabin like another wall, strong and quiet and steady. One afternoon, after mending socks in the sun, she asked him, "Why are you out here alone?" Zeke paused, wiped sweat from his brow. "There was a war," he said. "I came home different. My folks did not understand. I tried to make peace with people who had none to give. So I left." Edda looked down at her hands. "I understand that." He glanced at her, something soft in his expression. "I know you do." That night, after the children were asleep, she sat by the fire and let her fingers brush his when he passed her a cup. He stilled but did not pull away. "I used to think hope was a lie," she said. "But maybe it just needs the right person to carry it." He looked at her then, really looked, and something gentle passed between them. "I will carry it," Zeke said, "as long as you need." Edda blinked fast, and her voice came low. "What if I never stop needing it?" "Then I will never stop carrying it," he said. And for the first time since the fire, she let herself believe he meant it. By the middle of October, the aspens had turned gold, and frost rimmed the morning grass like lace. Edda had taken to rising before the sun, not out of fear anymore, but habit. The cabin was sound, the children safe, and the man who had given them shelter moved through each day with quiet purpose and a steadiness that made her chest ache in new, unfamiliar ways. Zeke was outside mending the fence that bordered the western slope, hammer echoing in rhythm with the crows overhead. Edda stepped into the yard with a basket of turnips from the garden he'd helped her clear. Ginny trailed behind, dragging a stick through the dirt, her cheeks rosy from the cold. "I can take those," Zeke called without looking up. Edda set the basket on a stump. "I've still got 2 hands." He leaned against the post, wiping his palms along his trousers. "Didn't say you didn't. Just thought you might want to save them for the bread you're always threatening to beat into shape." Ginny giggled. Edda narrowed her eyes, but the corner of her mouth twitched despite herself. "You mocking my baking now?" "No, ma'am," he said, straight-faced. "I'm praying over it." She knelt to brush dirt from the turnips. "You can pray harder after supper." Zeke nodded, eyes following Ginny as she wandered toward the creek bed. "Grady's still inside?" "Reading. He's picked over that Bible of yours like it's a treasure map. Keeps asking about Jonah's whale." Zeke's gaze flicked toward the cabin. "I've known men swallowed by smaller things." Edda stood slowly. "You ever been swallowed?" He studied her a moment, then said, "Once. Didn't realize it until I climbed out." The wind shifted. Edda crossed her arms, more from habit than chill. "You ever think of leaving here?" Zeke took his time answering. "I did once or twice, but I always think through the end of things before I start them. Nothing out there ever looked better than what's already in front of me." She looked away, heart stumbling. She didn't answer, only bent to scoop the basket again and walked it back toward the porch. That night, while the children slept, she sat across from Zeke at the table, sewing patches onto Grady's trousers. The oil lamp flickered between them, casting soft light on the worn wood and the calluses of his hands as he carved another length of pine. "You ever think of starting over?" he asked. Edda didn't look up. "Starting over is for folks who didn't lose everything." He set the carving down. "Or for those who did and kept walking anyway." She tied off a thread. "You think that's me?" "I don't think it," he said. "I see it." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was full, like something settling into place. He reached for the carving. This one's for Grady. Little wolf. Strong jaw, smart eyes. Edda took it gently. The weight of it was light, but something in her chest shifted under its shape. He'll like it, she said. Zeke watched her. You're good with them. They're mine, she said. That don't always mean a mother knows how to listen. Edda raised her eyes. You think I listen? I think you see them. That's rarer. Later, when the lamp was out and the fire low, she didn't sleep right away. She lay on her side, watching shadows move along the cabin walls. Across the room, Zeke's cot creaked as he turned, and his voice came quiet in the dark. You don't owe me anything, Edda. I know. But I'd stay, he said. If you ever wanted. She didn't answer. Not then. But in the morning, she made him coffee without him asking. And when she handed him the cup, her fingers lingered against his just long enough for it to mean something. He didn't speak on it. Neither did she. But the space between them had changed, and neither of them stepped away from it. By late October, snow dusted the high ridges, and the days leaned shorter. The first hard freeze came overnight, turning the pump handle stiff and the porch boards slick with frost. Edda woke early, rubbing warmth into her fingers before reaching for the kettle. The fire had burned low, but the coals still held their glow. She stirred them gently and added another log. From the loft, Grady's voice drifted down. Mama, can we find more antlers today? Edda glanced toward the window, where gray light filtered through the frost-laced glass. After chores, she called back. And only if your boots stay dry this time. She heard him sigh, then the familiar shuffle of his feet as he climbed down the ladder, Ginny trailing after, her braid half undone. Zeke came in from the barn not long after, brushing snow from his shoulders. He set a bucket of eggs on the table and hung his coat by the stove. Fell overnight, but it won't hold, he said. Too early yet. Edda didn't answer right away. She was watching Ginny try to balance an egg on the edge of the table without cracking it. She's determined, she murmured. Zeke leaned on the wall beside her. She gets that honest. Edda turned her head slightly. You always speak like you've known me longer than a season. He didn't look away. Sometimes it doesn't take long. Just takes paying attention. She didn't reply, but she didn't step back either. Later that morning, after the children had gone down to the creek with Zeke to check for deer tracks, Edda stood alone in the quiet kitchen, folding linens from the line. Her hands moved without thought, but her mind was full. She could feel the shape of the days changing. They were no longer just surviving. There was rhythm now. Work, warmth, the sound of laughter drifting through the trees. It frightened her more than fire ever had. When they returned, Grady held up a piece of birch bark smeared with charcoal. Zeke showed me how to draw elk prints, he said, proud. Edda crouched beside him. That so? You going to teach your sister? She already knows, he said. She finds more than me anyway. Zeke set down his rifle and leaned it in the corner. She's got sharp eyes. That night, after the children were asleep, Edda sat outside on the step with a shawl over her shoulders. The sky stretched wide and clear, stars glittering sharp as needles. Zeke joined her, offering a tin cup of cider, warm from the hearth. She took it in both hands. You ever miss the noise of towns? He shook his head. Too many voices saying nothing. I used to think I needed people around me, she said. Now I think I just needed someone steady. He didn't speak for a long beat. Then, do you know how I knew you'd stay? Edda looked sideways at him, the light catching the edge of his jaw. I didn't know I had. You stopped watching the door, he said. First week, you never turned your back on it. Then one morning, you poured me coffee with both hands. She was quiet for a long while. Then, I don't know how to start from nothing. You're not. he said. "You've got 2 sets of hands at your side. And mine, if you'll have them." She blinked hard, but the tears didn't fall. "You sure? I can't promise easy." "I never asked for easy," Zeke said. "I asked to stay." She set her cup down and reached for his hand slowly, deliberately. His fingers closed around hers like they'd always known the shape. Inside, the fire burned low, and the quiet was full of breath and promise. She didn't say anything more. She didn't need to. He had offered her hope when she couldn't carry it. Now she was learning how to carry him in return. By the first week of November, the ground had begun to harden beneath its layer of frost, and the wind carried with it the scent of snow that hadn't yet fallen. Edda stood behind the cabin, a basket of washed shirts stiffening on the line, her fingers red from the chill. She worked quickly, glancing now and then toward the tree line where Zeke had taken Grady to learn the difference between squirrel tracks and rabbit. Ginny was at the table inside, tracing lines on a scrap of old newspaper with the stub of a pencil. Edda had shown her how to hold it properly, and now the little girl kept her tongue between her teeth in concentration, drawing what looked like uneven circles meant to be chickens. Edda turned back to the laundry, placing the clothespins with care, though her thoughts weren't on the shirts. She was thinking of the way Zeke had stood beside her the night before, not close enough to touch, but close enough that she'd felt his warmth. How his silence hadn't asked anything of her, and yet had given her something she hadn't known to name. The horses stirred in the small paddock he'd built that summer, one of them snorting as a cloud of breath rose into the air. Edda watched them a moment, then reached down to gather the empty basket. Footsteps approached, measured, heavy enough to be a man's. She turned, expecting Zeke, but the figure that emerged from the trees wasn't him. The man was older, with a stained coat and a limp that slowed his gait. His hat sat low, but not low enough to hide the hard set of his jaw or the dull gleam of a revolver at his hip. Edda stepped forward, blocking the door with her body. "You're not welcome here." The man stopped several feet away, squinting past her toward the cabin. "Name's Whit Greeley. I'm lookin' for a woman with 2 young uns. Widow of a man owed me $300 in cattle and credit." Her mouth went dry. "You'll find no debt here." "I'll find what I'm owed," he said, voice like dry bark. "Law says I can collect it, or the marshal will." "The marshal knows nothing of this." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "He will." She heard a second set of boots then, coming fast from behind the barn. Zeke's voice wasn't loud, but it was sharp. "You've said enough." Greeley turned halfway, hand brushing his coat. "You the man keeping her?" Zeke didn't answer. He moved to stand beside Edda, stepping just close enough that his shoulder touched hers. "You'll ride back to town," Zeke said. "This is Farrow land. You come back without a writ, you won't get past the trees." Greeley's eyes slid to Edda. "You think this man's gonna keep you safe? That debt don't vanish just 'cause you took up with a ranch hand." Edda didn't blink. "I'm not hiding, but I'm not running anymore either." That seemed to settle something in Greeley. He spat into the dirt, tipped his hat without respect, and turned back toward the trees. "You got 2 weeks," he called over his shoulder. Zeke stood still until the man was well out of sight. Only then did he turn to her. "He'll try again," she said. "I know. He's not wrong. That debt is real." Zeke looked at her, steady. "So's your life. That matters more." She looked toward the paddock, where one of the horses had begun to pace. Her voice came quieter then. "I always thought if I stood still, the past would swallow me. I didn't expect to find someone willing to stand there with me." Zeke's reply came slow. "You never stood still. You just didn't have anyone who noticed." She felt her throat tighten again, but the tears didn't come. She was tired of weeping, tired of letting fear steal the ground from beneath her feet. I don't want to live from one threat to the next, she said. You won't, Zeke told her. We'll take it apart, piece by piece. I've got a mare I can sell in Bozeman. That'll cover half the debt, maybe more. She looked up at him, startled. That's your stock. He nodded. And you're my home. The words settled over her with a kind of gravity she hadn't expected. Not heavy, just certain. She reached for his hand, not tentative this time, not uncertain. And when their fingers laced together, there was no distance between them. Inside, Ginny had fallen asleep over her paper. Edda lifted the child gently and carried her to the bed, brushing a curl from her cheek. When she turned around, Zeke was there, watching not her, but the room, the quilt folded over the chair, the boots lined up against the hearth, the steam curling from the kettle. I never expected this, he said. Neither did I, she replied. But I want it. So do I. Outside, the wind picked up again, carrying the scent of snow. But inside the cabin the warmth held, and between them, the promise of something lasting had begun to root. The snow finally came on a windless morning, soft and steady, layering the roof and trees in quiet white. Edda stood in the doorway with her shawl drawn tight, watching flakes gather along the porch rail. The world looked gentler in snow, as if the sharpness of things could be muffled for a while. Ginny had fallen asleep still holding her wooden doll, and Grady was curled at the hearth with a dog-eared poetry primer Zeke had picked up from a peddler weeks back. Zeke came in from the barn with his gloves tucked into his belt and snow dusting his shoulders. The mare's gone, he said simply. Edda looked at him. You rode to Bozeman? Last 2 days, he said. Traded her for a payment note made out in your name. She stepped down from the doorway, her boots crunching lightly. You could have told me. His brow furrowed. I didn't want you feeling like you owed me. I don't, she said. But I do feel like you're mine. Zeke's mouth parted slightly, but he didn't speak. He reached for her hand instead, and she let him take it. They walked the length of the paddock in silence. The air was clean, the kind that tasted like ice on the tongue. She glanced at him, at the way he moved, measured and sure, at the way his jaw tightened when words didn't come easy. I've been thinking, she said, about staying, not just through winter. Zeke stopped walking but didn't let go of her hand. You already made a life here. I meant with you, she said. Not beside you. With you. His expression didn't change fast. It shifted slow, like sunrise over high country. You sure? I was sure when I watched you teach Grady to hold a knife without cutting himself. I was sure when you carried Ginny in from the garden with dirt all over her face and didn't say a word about it. I've been sure a while. Zeke looked down at their joined hands. I haven't known what to say, not because I didn't want this, but because I never expected someone like you to want it too. Edda stepped closer. Then don't say anything. Just stay. He didn't answer with words. He leaned in and pressed his forehead gently to hers, snow melting in his hair, breath shared between them. She closed her eyes and let herself feel the weight of his presence, certain, warm, real. That night, after supper, Grady fell asleep with his head on Zeke's knee, the book still open in his lap. Ginny curled up beneath the quilt Edda had pieced together from scraps of her old skirts. Edda moved around the cabin quietly, banking the fire and setting her sewing aside. Zeke watched her, the soft crease at the corner of his eyes deepening. She crossed the room and knelt beside him. I wanted to say something. Zeke laid a hand over hers. You don't need to. I do, she said. I want to marry you. Not because I need a name or a roof or safety, but because I want to wake up beside you for the next 50 winters. He didn't move for a moment. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small ring wrapped in cloth. I got this in town, he said softly. Didn't know if I'd get to ask. The band was simple thin gold, smooth with wear, but it caught the lamplight like it had been waiting to be seen. Edda let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "Yes," she whispered. Zeke slid the ring onto her finger. "You'll never have to run again." "I know," she said, and leaned in to kiss him slow, steady, nothing rushed. Just the quiet beginning of something that would last. They were married 2 days later, before the snow deepened too much for travel. Reverend Lang from the South Ridge rode up with his old mule and a Bible wrapped in oilskin. Ginny picked wild pine sprigs for Edda's hair, and Grady stood beside Zeke with his shoulders thrown back like a grown man. No music, no crowd, just words spoken in front of a fire, hands clasped, and a promise that didn't need repeating. Spring came slow that year, but it came. The frozen ground softened. The river ran high with meltwater. Edda planted onion sets and potatoes while Zeke repaired the west fence. They worked side by side, no longer strangers, no longer waiting for the world to take something from them. By the time the apple tree bloomed behind the cabin, Ginny had started reading her own letters, and Grady was tall enough to lift the feed sack without dragging it. They laughed more, slept sounder, ate supper with the windows open. One night, as dusk settled and the last of the dishes were drying on the sill, Edda stepped out into the yard and looked back at the cabin lamplight glowing soft behind the windows, smoke curling from the chimney, voices drifting out through the open door. Zeke came to stand beside her, his arms slipping around her waist. "This is what I wanted," she said. He leaned his face to her hair. "This is what we made." And they stood there together, watching the stars rise over the ridgeline, the night full of warmth and the unshakable peace of knowing they had come through the fire and found not just safety, but home.